awesome special guests today from Slack. We will be introducing them shortly, but we'll give it a minute or two while people are still joining. So we're really excited. This is going to be a jam-packed 30 minutes today. We have a lot of great tips, and if you use Slack or are interested in it, or maybe have teammates joining Slack, this is going to be an awesome onboarding resource that you can share with anybody getting started, especially in the nonprofit space, because we'll be putting everything through that specific lens, which will be really great. For intros, I'll kick off. My name is Mitch Stein. I am the founder and CEO here at Pond. We do a ton of live conversations like this on a broad range of topics, from how to use Slack at a nonprofit to all kinds of DEI topics and leadership lessons, everything you can think of. We are kicking off a new learning series next week, starting with volunteering, where we'll have a special workshop around achieving more equity in volunteering and reframing service, plus a showcase of different nonprofit leaders succeeding with big changes in their volunteer programs and new technology. So be sure and check out everything coming up. But without further ado, we're here today to be talking about Slack. And before we get going, I would love for Angela and Allie, if you don't mind, just introducing yourself, a bit about your role, and a bit about you and the layers of identity you bring into this conversation today. Allie, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you for including us today, Mitch. I'm Allie Nakonik. I'm a success leader at Slack for our higher education and nonprofit vertical. And that means I help customers adopt Slack for their internal missions. And for this group, we're excited to see how this can help you in your own day-to-day and building your communities.
Amazing. Angela?
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Daniels. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am on the Slack for Good team. We wear a lot of hats at Slack for Good, but one of my main ones is managing the Slack for Nonprofits program, which is why I'm here. And so with that program, we give free and discounted workspaces to nonprofit organizations. I'm going to go ahead and pop in the link where you can learn more about that if you're interested in using Slack at your organization. But from my own personal background, the reason that I'm so invested in this work is that I am the co-chair of a board of a nonprofit foundation. And it's really important for me, for nonprofits, to be able to effectively communicate and work without having to spend too much mind share on it, because really what you want to do is achieve your mission. You don't want to spend time learning new technical resources necessarily. So that's why I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you both. We're really excited to have you. And for everyone, I'll quickly just go over so you have a real world example, if maybe you aren't yet familiar with Slack, how we use it at Pond within the nonprofit community. And then Allie is going to go through tips and tricks and kind of a deeper dive on different parts of using Slack. And Angela just dropped something in the chat. If anyone has comments or questions as we're going, feel free to drop them in the chat too. So just to get started, I'm going to share my screen here. And like I said, just giving you a quick overview of, if you're not familiar with Slack, we've used screenshots here. We were going to do a tour, but didn't want to share any personal details as we were clicking through from people. And as an overview, we use Slack as a platform and a community platform amongst our nonprofit members, where they can connect with their peers around their challenges, their focus areas, their needs they have. Anyone that's using Pond can, and actively working at a nonprofit or seeking work at a nonprofit, can request to join for free. We do vet those applications to just make sure we're avoiding having people in the community that are vendors trying to sell things. We want to keep this a safe space and really dedicated to our nonprofit members. So what do people use Slack communities for? If you haven't seen this kind of image before, maybe a lot of you, this is a lot of your day at work if you use Slack often. But we have kind of 5 core use cases for our community that we're building. And we organize those by channels right here on the left. Water cooler is kind of our general. This is where new people introduce themselves, like this person here, sharing who they are, what they do, things that they need help with, or help they can offer. The other thing I'll flag is that over here on the left, you can see that you can have multiple Slack communities that you're a part of internally for your own organization, I'm part of some external networks, so you can see I have 5 here, and I can manage those notifications for those individually. The second thing that is really the core use case of our Slack community at Pond for nonprofits is asking for advice and getting help from each other. So people post questions like, hey, I am struggling to use QuickBooks effectively at my nonprofit. What are the resources? People can reply directly in here. You'll see that instead of a new message within the channel, they've created what's called a thread. So that exists over here on the right. It helps keep things more organized. So that whole conversation around QuickBooks lives in one location instead of scattered throughout the broader conversation in the channel. And that's a really easy way to make Slack a bit more organized and able to go back and find things later when you need them. So the third thing that is really useful in our Slack community is our jobs channel. So people that are looking to hire or seeking employment, you can post your resumes here. You can post specific job listings, things, friends that are looking, anything along those lines. And this is a really good way to also just network and connect with people that are looking or hiring. The fourth way is personally my favorite because I think Slack can be really fun, if you can't tell by Angela's screen background, that it is a place to just celebrate. Like if a lot of this work can be fairly isolating, especially if you're on smaller teams or working remotely. So don't be afraid to drop in, we just had this big win, or we won a new grant, or I had a friend that did this amazing TED Talk like Julie shared here. This is a place to just be excited and encouraging to each other because we're all in this work together. And the last thing that we use Slack for within the Pond community is we just have a lot going on at Pond. So this is a really easy way to stay up to date on what's happening. We'll post events and announcements here first before you see them anywhere else. And so you can easily look back and keep track of everything that's coming up at Pond. So like I said, I wanted to go through that quickly just to give anyone a frame of reference if you're unsure what Slack was or how it worked in the real world. But I want to stop and spend the bulk of the time going through the presentation that Ali put together on really maximizing Slack once you've jumped in and joined, which is super easy. And I would just add there's you can use it in a browser, you can download a desktop app, you can have it on your phone, on a mobile app, and all that is completely free. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ali.
Thank you, Mitch. Let me know when y'all can see my screen.
We can see it.
All right, let's go in slideshow mode. Love that example, and thank you for orienting everyone. If you are new to Slack, what Mitch showed you is what we call a workspace. So really that's kind of the container for your team or your community in your mission. So I do like to orient our conversations in this space around that idea of a community. And I recently heard Angela speak. She came with me down to Arizona State University a couple months ago and really dived into this concept of the different levels of community that you can build. Like for them, they have a campus, and within that you might have your student cohort, and beyond that it's navigating your own maybe moral compass to find conversations that interest you. So first, kudos for your involvement in those communities. I think it's just important to recognize that effort, and two, recognizing Slack's community mission. I've been at Slack for a little over 5 years and have really thoroughly enjoyed my job because I really recognize and can relate my work to our mission, where we're making people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and productive. And for me, that's oftentimes not just working lives, that's your learning lives, or maybe even your volunteering lives, things that kind of round out your persona. So one of the kind of core tenets of, unfortunately, I'll take you through slides instead of a live demo, but we've got examples to show along the way. I think a lot of what I get to do within my team is kind of take the functionality within a technology and relate it to more a process or a step that you're taking to go out or go throughout your day to day. So within that concept of a workspace that Mitch showed you, think of that as kind of the container of your vision. Is this a team? Is this a company? Is this a campus? and really being able to then create those channels and conversations that make up that vision. So making sure that you've got that kind of core tenant and that you're sharing that within the channels that either you create or your peers create. Out of the box, if you sign up for Slack for free, you get 2 channels. One of them is general and one of them is random. And you absolutely can and should rename those channels. Maybe that's announcements, maybe that's a welcome channel. And from there, you can post a message to kind of set the tone for how you'll be interacting together. So rather than a single horrendous copied email chain, you've got that kind of multi-voice conversation going back to back in a channel, as Peter shows here. Obviously, it's probably less fun when me or my peers are doing this for a commercial company. So like IBM is wall-to-wall on Slack. So you can imagine their CIO or CEO rather posting guidelines or expected use policies. But in the context of a nonprofit, this is where you kind of get to lay out, what's expected here, what roles are people going to play, how are you going to kind of sign up for that mutual contract in a less formal environment. And some of that could be fun, right? This could be like, I have created a couple channels for us to get started, but free reign, go ahead and create others that we see fit to continue our conversations. At its most basic though, pinning is one of the first concepts that I'd want to introduce you to. So in some of those messages that Mitch showed, maybe there's one message early on that you post that has maybe links out to your website or links out to an event that you're posting on LinkedIn and starting to plan for. When a message is highlighted in yellow like this, and when you hover over a message, you're given a drop-down that lets you pin a message to a channel. And what that does is kind of like a bulletin board. It will keep that message nestled up next to the channel name for easy reference. So we do this a lot for, maybe it's a quarterly report that we're looking at, or internally we have our big Dreamforce event coming up later this fall. And we might have registration details pinned in a channel. So think of it as like most top of mind, easily referenceable message for the full team in that single channel. And you'll note here, the captain community person posting, they use emojis and bold text. So Slack is rich in its formatting. You can bold messages, you can highlight in red code, you can thankfully now use bullets and indentation all at once. So it interacts much like a Word document or an email that you might be used to prior to. And you can drop in hyperlinks.
We are liberal emoji users. So thank you for highlighting that early and often.
It certainly has bled into everything else that I do, where I think it's rare when I send a text without one, and I don't regret it.
It feels like you're being mean if you don't have one.
Right. Awesome. The other concept to keep in mind in Slack is while it is a relatively flat hierarchy, I have a feeling that in the case that Mitch showed you, he's probably the administrator of that workspace. And that role goes to whoever creates, maybe this is pond.slack.com as your workspace name. Anyone with an admin kind of role beyond just regular users does have access to some back-end functionality. And one of those recommended in this case is a default channel list. So remember how I mentioned when you first start Slack, you get 2 channels as a starting point. It is very rare that you'll just maintain having only those 2 channels. And in fact, you probably will have hundreds, if not thousands, depending on how you're using Slack. And so in this case, this is an admin's way of kind of leading a horse to water, where you're saying, yes, we have this welcome channel, but we also have project channels, we have events channels, we have social channels. And so by selecting or listing channels out here, that will mean that any user who joins that workspace will have those channels listed on their sidebar as a visual starting point to engage. Though if you're starting from a blank slate, I will talk about this momentarily, but Slack is thankfully searchable, similar to Google, where you can kind of navigate your own way, but this is a nice way of kind of packaging up what you find to be most important for the community. This is more of a pro tip. So it sounds like some of you have already been using Slack based on the chat. And if you are planning to use Slack in a paid workspace, so maybe this is for those of you who, like Angela shared, have a comped instance or a discounted instance of Slack. Workflow Builder is thankfully a tool that's been available in Slack for the past couple years that lets you build no-code apps and bots. So as someone with a non-technical background, this was a huge win for me, because a lot of what we end up doing on my success team is kind of painting the art of the possible and then guiding people through the steps to set that up. And one of the examples, or rather the two examples that I think stand out most for the Workflow Builder, one of them is shown here, where you can actually customize a welcome message for every member joining. So think of this maybe as you're preparing for a volunteering event and you have, 100 volunteers who you've brought into your workspace, and you don't have time to manually greet each one and send them the kind of document dictating what they've signed up to do, or maybe it's a volunteer schedule. This allows you to create one form that automatically gets customized to the person it's being sent to by name, and is once deployed, triggered by that user joining a channel. And this message from Onboarding Bot would then be sent to them via Slack Bot, which is a cutesy version of kind of your Slack personal assistant. So through a direct message, you would get this Onboarding Bot message without an individual having to manually send it every time. So automation in bulk to kind of set the standard for some sort of point in time activity. I've linked out to Workflow Builder here. And you can scroll through. The nice part is there are a lot of templates that you can get started with right out of the gates. So that one I explained was the welcome bot message, but there's also things like collecting feedback or collecting vacation time. So manufacturing or creating one-time forms where then you can kind of standardize requests coming in. I like the suggestion bot with Polly, where depending on your level of interest and experience with Slack's platform or app directory, you can start to kind of build automation upon automation, like you see some of the examples here. But I definitely recommend the welcome bot and even the feedback or live Q&A one. Probably the table stakes though, so back to more day-to-day expectations. The announcements capabilities in Slack are probably what helped us reach the broad audience that we have today. As a fun trivia question for all of you, Slack is about a little over 8 years old and was originally a product of our founders group of like a small team back in 2014 who were designing a video game, and they felt that email and texting and calling each other wasn't enough because they were split across California and Canada. And so this immediacy chat app was the byproduct of that team trying to develop a video game, where ultimately they realized what they had and pivoted to continue to grow Slack out. But a lot of what they were doing was sharing updates back and forth of progress. So marking those milestones, asking questions back and forth. And that's really where we've been able to scale out to, again, thinking about the CIO of IBM sharing company-wide announcements in a feed. Capability-wise, there is such a thing as an announce-only channel. So it might not necessarily be something you need to set up, but if you want to have more of a one direction feed where a small team or a single person is sharing updates, but you don't necessarily want the noise in the channel of a back and forth dialogue, we do recommend differentiating in what we'd call a channel naming convention. So this could be announce-events or announce-pond. And then you'd have a secondary channel maybe around ask pond or help pond, where there's more of that back and forth inquiry playing out. But in this case, like Mitch had highlighted, they've opted to use Allison's post of an announcement and then threads to organize the follow-on conversation with, of course, those emoji reactions, classically called reactgees, as a response mechanism. So here's one of those examples of soliciting community feedback. One that could be structured through a channel on its own. So it could be something like pond-feedback, where people are openly posting suggestions, ideas, reactions to maybe a program that was just run. It could be, hey, how did today's webinar with Slack go? Let's share our feedback in channel. But in this screenshot, you see an integration with Polly, which is a known survey bot, where you're able to position a question and gather real-time feedback. And this is the view of an individual setting up that poll that then gets posted in a channel and live results come in. There's things like Polly or survey bot. Oftentimes for those getting started, we even just do emoji polls where we might craft a message saying, I think one of the popular ones from pre-pandemic was, where do we want to go in our team lunch today? Picnic basket would be, the store down the street. A baguette would be the sandwich shop around the corner, and maybe the truck would be the food truck alley. And then people could live react, and that gives you your results. One of the things we've seen, though, when it's some automation like this, where you have flexibility to anonymize results or group results, it solicits more engagement than maybe an individual who'd be intimidated to respond with a full message as that conversation or reactions come in. So Angela, would you be so kind as to post the link to our Slack app directory in the chat window? Caution, this might be a rabbit hole where you have fun searching through, but we've got over 2,500 apps that you can integrate into your Slack workspace. Though I'll caveat that if you're using the free version of Slack, you are limited to 10 integrations. And oftentimes, I guarantee you the first one will be Giphy, where you can integrate with those interactive memes. But that could be things like document management, calendaring. Zoom is a popular one. It just depends on what your team is most keen to pull into Slack. Thank you. Same with the ideas. I think this was one of the fun ones I've seen play out, where at Slack, we had a channel for a while called Slack on Slack, and it would almost be our method of drinking our own champagne or eating our own dog food, where it was, hey, if we're going above and beyond to pitch ideas for our customers for how they should use Slack, let's turn that on its head internally. And it led to us having almost internal hackathons twice a year called Slack Days, where a channel would be a way where we organize those ideas that then might lead to another event, but it provides an open forum for people to provide those suggestions. And you can see in this example, it's a workflow template, like we talked about earlier, that gives the structure of how those suggestions can come in. Or if someone wants to freeform, they're not limited to do so. They can sit side by side if you do have a workflow set up, or if you do want to add rich text commentary and file uploads. So similar to attaching a file to an email, you can attach through the Lightning Bolt files from your desktop or links from out on the internet. And of course, everybody's favorite part of Slack, what will naturally happen, even if you don't set it up in advance, is cohorts of community within itself. One of the first ones I always hear gets created is the dog channel. No matter what the topic of the workspace is, there's usually a pets channel or a dog or cat channel. And as a new puppy owner myself, I'm all about it. One of my favorites internally at Slack is the Dad Jokes channel. And as I don't know if I'm right in guessing this, Mitch, but I feel like I'm hearing some Midwest in your voice. Yeah.
Yes.
I grew up in Cleveland, so I am a founding member of the All Roads Lead to Ohio channel.
I was next to Indiana, so good.
Right, the A's. But it's not just, working in fun, but it's also a way of deepening the engagement of your community. So we have a parents channel, we have a grayscale channel, we have channels that represent our employee resourcing groups. And I have members on my team who are about to go on maternity leave. And so there is a new mothers channel that I just think is conversations that are necessary in playing out no matter your community's mission. But this way you give individuals on your team the freedom, if you will, to create and join as needed when you're using public channels. Have any of these spun up yet on the Pond workspace?
Our team tends to use, we have a life fitness channel. So people share workouts, and although then I think some people get intimidated by some of the more active, more ambitious exercisers.
As a non-Peloton owner, I would probably fall under that. Excellent. Well, I'm excited to hear what else spins up. And if you are curious what is available on your workspace already, besides what you'll see naturally on your sidebar of channels you've starred, channels that you're a part of, and your direct messages, you can always use the search bar at the top of your Slack interface to search for a channel name, a person, a document that was shared. We have built-in flexible filters and results categories. So if you're looking for that fitness channel, you can type fitness, look at the channel tab, and see any channel tied to that name where you can opt in and join. The exception would be for any of those padlocked channels. That means they're private, where you have to physically be invited or have created that channel to access it or view it. But another trivia question for down the road is that rumor has it, Slack is an acronym that stands for the searchable log of all conversations and knowledge. So take that with a grain of salt, but I have heard that rumor.
I love that.
And again, don't forget to have fun. So if you do dive down that Slack app directory hole, there are fun ones that you can integrate. And I guarantee you, if there's homework on this call, it's probably going to be people integrating with Giphy so they can add that for birthday announcements or congratulatory posts.
I can attest that that is highly, heavily used within our Slack group.
Even in our largest, most corporate companies, that's typically the most used application. Personal tip, I know Mitch already mentioned it, but I highly doubt all of you are necessarily in a desk job 9 to 5 anymore these days. So with that flexibility, definitely encourage the mobile app where you can kind of check on the go, draft messages, send them when you have internet. It's just a much easier way to stay up to date and interact without having to be tied to your desktop. And we'll share this deck. This is more of the kind of rapid fire once you're in front of your own Slack to play around with these. But I highly recommend the Command K for switching around channels as you navigate Slack. And if you are in front of yours now, that's on a Mac. So Command / or Control on a PC / will reveal all the shortcuts if you want to nerd out with that. And if you need help going forward, you can reach us at feedback@slack.com or through the / command in Slack itself. I think we are right at time if you want to take us home, Mitch.
Yes, no, that was awesome, Allie. Thanks so much. And thank you, Angela, for joining. My last takeaway would also just be to make sure you actively manage notifications. I think that's, there's all these great things that they've both brought up. I think that's one where people can get overwhelmed sometimes if it is a particularly active channel or they're part of a bunch of them. So just remember that you can really get really specific on the type of notifications you get, when, how, and be sure to manage that for what works best for you. But thank you so much. I know we're right at time, so I appreciate the time, everybody. We'll post this so you can share with your teams or other people using Slack, and use this as an onboarding resource as well. So thank you, Allie. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks all. Have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you.